Hey, just curious, have you ever seen a snake and a wolf fight each other?
Not personally, but according to the behind the crest explanation, which has six tiles to it from the Atletico Dallas website, the snake and the wolf have battled for centuries, one with teeth, the other with venom. The wolf can devour the snake, but one strike is all it takes for the snake to defeat the wolf.
And what is Atletico Dallas exactly for those who don't know? I mean, I know, you know,
Well, Phil,
a select few know now,
as
but
as we
the greater
know,
public maybe doesn't know.
Phil, the biggest soccer news to people who pay attention to Austin FC over the last 2 days is that my suburban hometown in the greater Dallas area, which similar to Frisco, is not the city of Dallas, but is also where a professional soccer team will be playing in 2027. They announced their brand identity. And Garland, Texas, one of the namesakes of Arlen, Texas from King of the Hill, will be known as Atletico Dallas,
Hmm.
a,
Not in Dallas,
not in Dallas, a
but
Spanish name.
Atletico Garland
Atletico
doesn't
Garland
work,
apparently
probably.
not available or not sexy enough. Their crest features a snake on the left hand side, opposing a Texas rattlesnake, opposing a Mexican gray wolf on the right side. And there's so many ways to interpret it just at its face and away from the brand metaphor. Is it the constant fight between quote unquote real Texans and Mexican American Texans? Is it the forever conflict within the Tejano soul? It's difficult to parse the metaphor terribly well for a Spain Spanish styled name of a club with an English British Isles styled crest. Honestly, it looks like an amalgamation of the Welsh national crest and about
Hmm.
a dozen different English associated football club crests, with
And
three of their four colors being black, white, and silver. And the fourth color being such a faint blue that you can barely tell that it's blue.
and not a easy replicable crest. Like you couldn't draw this on a notebook very well. It would take you a long
I
time to do that.
what I want more than anything, trolling wise, is I want somebody to start a fake SG for this, and their first big thing is a social media contest for
Hmm.
you draw our new iconic crest, which one of their primary slogan is apparently glory from dust. Phil, you're a poet. Phil, there are two poets on this podcast right now. Poetically,
Yeah.
can we parse how they get glory from dust, and that's the crest that is difficult for people to draw. I just want to see actual adults draw like preschooler crayon level replicas of this crest. That I I get that there were a lot of meetings and that they paid somebody a lot of money to come up with this, but it is just not, the math is not mathing for me.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's like drawing Tippy the turtle for those of you old enough to
Mm-hmm.
remember
Mm-hmm.
what that is. Yeah.
Yes.
So, and also, speaking of poetry, kind of in the middle of this announcement, for no reason, Atletico Dallas is imploring you to return to your animal skin,
Oh, Phil,
which is very Iron John, right? So, like,
Phil, Phil, come on.
yes.
Okay. Here's one thing I will get their back on. Even if it's not serious, it is objectively hilarious. So they did
True.
one thing pretty right, because when this team is down 2-0, that's what everybody's going to have to do. They're going to have to reach down deep and return to their animal skin like Animorphs. Are you familiar with Animorphs? I know they were after your time.
I have a
Kids
feeling it's
novels.
nerdy.
It was a
Yeah.
series of kids books, and the covers feature people morphing into animals, and you'll see it deployed as a meme in a lot of different ways. But that's what I think of when I think of return to your animal skin. It's that they want half of their fans to morph into Texas rattlesnakes and half of their
Mhm.
fans to then morph into Mexican gray wolves. Everyone start fighting each other and killing one another. And then it won't matter if they lose.
I think that it's you actually reach under your seat on 95-degree August day, and there's a bear pelt under your seat that you were supposed to put on like a flotation device in the event of an airplane disaster. And you have to wear that until they manage to get things level again. And you will
Wow.
scream pretty loud if you are wearing a bear pelt in the blazing August sun, trying
Yeah.
to cheer a US League One team on from a 2-goal deficit.
Oh, it's not League One. It's USL
Oh,
Championship, Phil. It's
oh,
USL Championship. This is
oh.
this is something that I love. I love that we're catching here live on the air, because you're not the only person who made this assumption. A lot of people assumed this
Mhm,
was a USL League One side. This is a
mhm.
USL Championship team that will play Las Vegas Lights, Phoenix Rising,
Oh,
New
wow.
Mexico United, Union Omaha. This is a USL Championship side that is
Oh, this gets even better then.
playing in a Dallas suburb at the intersection of a toll road named for President George Bush the First,
Mhm.
at a complex that has not been built yet,
Mm.
whose branding identity was announced on a Friday night at a 7 p.m. music concert that they delayed for the better part of an hour rather than announcing it right at 7, because they were letting it still fill in because there was a rain delay. It looked very full based on all the photos. I scarcely have more words, frankly, than just how perfectly this went off based on my expectations. Thankfully, the most exciting thing of the weekend, because nothing else was happening this weekend.
Nothing else.
Nothing whatsoever. But yeah, Atletico Dallas not playing in Dallas, just like the other professional soccer team named Dallas. There's nothing else that happened this weekend. To me, not as big as Boss Nation disastrous branding launch, but definitely in that category branding launch.
Sure. So see if they
That's
keep it.
that's why I think it's pretty clear everybody is listening to us recording for the second time in 2 days, because that's the biggest Texas and Austin specific soccer news of the weekend.
Emergency podcast. They did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies, including the one that you may be experiencing right now after yesterday's 3-0 loss. Well, Saturday's by the time you are probably hearing this. I think we're going to drop this on Monday morning. And this is an unusual time of the week for us to record, as we alluded to at the end of that intro, where we mocked some branding because that felt like a good cathartic thing to do. But the reason we're here is twofold. One, I don't think we're maybe feeling the same level of kind of emergency that other fans were feeling after Saturday night. I think certainly some levels of alarm, certainly some levels of concern. If you read my article on Sunday morning, you got the sense of that. And I wanted to bring Moisés in here too, because I was in the post-match press conference. Moisés got to be in the locker room. And what we wanted to do here is share a little bit of a perspective as I drink a beer out of a vintage MLS to ATX koozie, not imagining that sometime in 2025 we would be contemplating the plight of the second coach in the team's history and the struggles of a $30 million front line. Didn't think that that would be where I would be at in 2025. Could not see into the future like that. But here we are. We just wanted to give some perspective. Again, I know it's a rough patch that the team is experiencing right now, but we just wanted to not necessarily calm everybody down, but to give people a kind of fuller, broader perspective so we can go into the next 7 or 8 May matches not wanting to fly a plane right away, or not going in with a sense of dread and doom.
Yeah, there's one of the things that we discussed before we parted company on Saturday night is that the press conference was a roller coaster. And that's something that whether you speak one or both of the languages being spoken, was pretty apparent that there were definitely high emotions and a lot of things wrapped up in what Brad Stuver called the biggest mistake of his career, what everybody in the locker room on their faces knew was was something that they are frankly petrified of being a turning point for their season. It definitely changed where they are in the table, and the question of whether it is the beginning of a very steep downslide, which, to be clear, is not something that we want to root for, is not something that helps us sell newspapers, as it were. There can be, from certain coaches who won't go named, who are no longer coaching this team, that there is some sort of massive benefit that we get in covering the team, in having things go very poorly, very disastrously. Sure, there are people who will Photoshop memes and cartoonishly employ AI to clown on players and coaches and that sort of thing. And while we will be critical, we don't go to that full on, let's make a mockery of these people who, sure, they make a lot more money than we do, but they are doing their jobs, and they're doing their jobs to the best of their ability at the level of cohesion that they're at. This is not a thing that we're never going to say that a performance like Saturday night is something that these guys, obviously, they just don't care. They just don't want to win.
Mm-hmm.
And by the same token, we don't get some sort of extra points or extra clicks or something that do anything for us financially or otherwise that incentivize us to make light of what was a really terrible night for not just the team's star goalkeeper, but all of them, coaching staff, players, all of them on down. Saturday night was not a good night. It was a night when Q2 emptied out like what many Austin fans would say of lesser stadiums, and in fact regularly do. Other stadiums that start out as empty as Q2 was by the time that third goal got scored. So yeah, a lot of what we're looking at doing is contextualizing some things, looking at nuance that may have gotten missed if you don't speak Spanish coming from the press conference, just where their heads are at and where their heads were at based on what they've told us going into a month that everybody was expecting would be difficult.
Right. And so if you follow the team and if you're listening to this, you probably know that Eric Goodman, of course, started the press conference asking about the inability of the team to come back from deficits. That 1-0 deficit happened. We heard from Stuver later about where he felt things were, but Nico Estevez talked about being proud of the team responding, talking about their effort, talking about XG at some point that got dropped in there. And then it got into a little bit more back and forth about how he was seeing the players really caring and working hard in training, things that we don't doubt. I mean, things that any professional MLS player should do, but it was him being more on the defensive than I think we've seen him this season. So that was a little arresting. And then I asked about just in particular, the defense concerned me because they've now had 3 losses in their last 4 games. Those 3 losses were by a combined score of 10-1. And yeah, okay, you could say 5-1 Vancouver, that's an anomaly, but you stack that against a 2-0 loss to Houston and a 3-0 loss to Minnesota. Minnesota's a good team. Houston, they're evolving. We don't exactly know. These are not the 2 teams, Galaxy and SKC, that we are avoiding right now. We are not watching this game. We are recording this instead of watching that match. And we missed apparently a Maya Yoshida own goal.
Yep.
So that's something that game offered. Again, he had some answers specific to this game and the mistakes they made. But one of the things that I'm going to be looking at in the weeks to come is, okay, is that defense of the first 7 games that did so well, is that something that Austin is going to return to? Is this just a weird blip, or has something happened? Has something turned to where they've been figured out defensively and they're not going to be as effective? And what we're seeing now is maybe the new normal, and maybe the first 7 games we saw was this kind of positive anomaly.
I think there's a lot to unpack that, to be fair, we're going to do in a pretty compact way. But looking at the press conference itself, one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that there are some changing dynamics that I know that we recognized at the beginning of the season and may be there in the back of our heads, but especially for English-focused media, English-only fans that pay attention to things, there is a certain amount, sure, that Eric, that Colby, some other folks who were in the room who do not natively speak Spanish could pick up on from body language, from gestural stuff, but lacking the full translation in the room. One of the things that then happens, which is something that we didn't experience, Josh, because everything was in English, is that you have those questions that went to him first. And then we switched to Spanish. And the additional context of where he was going in talking about being proud of his players responding, which I think is an unfortunate translational move of Nico's rather than being the thing that was very quick for folks to jump on. Eric in particular, which, all fairness to our colleague and our pal, he is very much looking for that headline grab. And he had that headline. And when you get into Spanish poetical nuance, which is very much the way that Nico talks.
To be fair, I also use that in my headline.
Correct.
Because to me, that was the most kind of telling, indicative, emblematic quote of the press conference. But again, you're here to help fill in some nuance and to...
Yeah. And that's the thing is, it's not that it isn't the right leading quote coming out of it. It's that lacking the additional context for what he was trying to say. And I'm also not saying that in any way that this is what could be implied by your coverage or your take on it. There is this tendency with English-focused soccer media of going, well, he didn't say it in English and I'm covering what I understood, which isn't what you did at all. But in this case is a thing that it takes until you do the translational layer on what else was said to add that additional context, which you're not going to get that in the Statesman coverage necessarily or the Chronicle coverage because they've got to get it out to the paper. So that's the additional layer of time and consideration that we're able to give. But what he was getting at most prominently was what he got into more in his first couple of answers to Spanish language questions, which is that unlike the Houston game, he was saying that by contrast to the Houston game where they just did fold up and die. He did acknowledge that what he was proud of in his players, though not proud of their performance overall, was that they had made that progress since the last game. And immediately in various different fan message boards, some of the most vocal comments that were coming up were things about how Nico's the wrong coach for this club. He should be in there ripping them new blank holes. He should really be ripping them a new one. To me, that is not a great manner of coaching for the folks.
It's not motivational.
It's not motivational. It's not.
It strikes me of during part of the Wolf era where people would want me to ask really pointed, mean questions because they want someone to be a channel for their anger and their frustration with somebody who is in the room with that person. And that's not the way that you do journalism. So I wasn't going to do that. But I understand the frustration. One of the things to give you just a little insight into the press box, as soon as Stuver fumbled that initial goal, press box went silent. Press box was stunned.
Yeah.
Because Brad Stuver does not make those kind of mistakes ever.
Yeah, it was. We've even talked about those nights last season and the season before where there was just this completely funereal vibe in the locker room. I'm probably never going to forget that particular moment in the press box among many experiences and reactions in the press box where there have been those moments of, wait, what happened?
Yeah, because even when it was funereal in the locker rooms in those years, it was gallows humor in the press box. Like there was just how bad can this get at points, and we had to laugh because we also had to write about it and chronicle about it, and that was the way for us to cope.
Yeah, and in getting ready to go downstairs, you were like, are you coming down? And I was like, yeah, I just need a minute because I've had to go down there and figure out how I'm going to ask those guys questions in the locker room. And I ran out of my canned stuff that I felt would actually make sense. And we'll get to this later, but I had forgotten, oh, wait, but Ilya's here. Ilya will always actually talk to us.
Right.
But running back to the overall progression and arc of what Nico said in the press conference, I think that it was fair of you to characterize it as rambling, but he rambled tangentially far less than I would expect him to after a loss like this that represented such completely unpredictable things, because we can predict all kinds of how much worse could it get. Well, this could happen. This could happen. It could be this scoreline. This person could tear their ACL, that number of different things. But that Brad Stuver mistake was not on anybody's bingo cards of unfortunate things that could happen, where it was, I literally I said goal, and you said, what? And then you looked up to see the ball in the net, and it was like you didn't understand how the threads of reality had woven themselves together, because it just didn't make sense. And to his credit, I think that Nico is a great deal more coherent than I think he's being given credit for. And boy, I wish I were getting payola to say something like that, because I got bills. Everybody's got bills. But I'm literally just saying that because when you look at everything that was said, even though it may not be people's favorite thing to go and actually look at it and look at the transcript and the translated transcripts that you can get from Whisper AI and that kind of thing, there was this fluid through line to everything that Nico said to us in press availabilities previously this season that is more calm, cool, and collected than I think I would expect from most coaches, which to me, as one-sided of a disastrous press conference as it may seem in English only, or when in the heat of the moment and the heat of the despair of a night like that night, latching on to the way that it led off may have colored people's expectations. The previous coach would not have approached it that level-headed, and would have approached it with a, we still have 7, if not 8 matches to play this month.
And it would be, here's how the players didn't execute the game plan, which Nico, to his credit, didn't do. And by the way, yeah, I do write while I watch the game. And the reason that I was looking down is I saw the shot and I saw just the weakness of the shot and Stuver there. And it's like, oh, he's got this. He saves this. And went to my computer for a second, and then all of a sudden I look up again when you and then the goal has happened, and then I furiously go back to Apple TV and rewind and actually no, because at that point we're well ahead of Apple TV ahead. So I just wait for it to transpire on the screen and
well
there it is in all its horror.
You looked right to the iPad and you were like, oh, I'm gonna roll it back, and then you went, oh, it hasn't happened yet. With the dejection of, I get to see it live. I get to see it live on the broadcast, and here it comes. That's really the strange reality of last night, is it really does take remooring oneself. The other thing, couple overriding things that I wanted to say about the stuff that gets said in that press conference video, which if you speak both languages, especially, I would recommend you watch. And if people are creating translational AI transcripts of everything in Spanish and English, if such a thing becomes available, which I frankly would probably be a cool thing for the club to do if they have the resources.
Noda works pretty well, by the way. NOTTA. It's a good resource if you're looking to
create
something through and get both languages. Yeah.
There were questions later by another one of our esteemed colleagues pointing directly to the uselessness of Osman Bukhari. And I don't agree with that assessment, but
that's been a recurring theme with this.
A recurring theme
that media personality.
That again, I have a great deal of respect for the way that Nico handled that question as well, which was to directly engage with how Buka was really not the problem. He was, like in the Houston game, he was incredibly competently defended against. The problem is not Osman. In my mind, it is they've got to figure out how to open him back up, because he is handling being triple covered with a plum. There are only so many things that one man can do against triple coverage.
But he's much better one-on-one.
The problem is elsewhere.
And teams know that.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that is on coaching. That is on his teammates. The quote that I translated out for you that you put in the piece this morning, where Nico said that he's an optimist, a person who believes everything in life happens for a reason, and this defeat happened for a reason, as did the one in Houston. And he believes that experiences like this forge the team, and suffering and experiencing the worst does a lot to form their character. Again, following a loss like that, I don't know that I would be that articulate. And I feel like that is some of the context that has gotten lost in the rawness of the moment. And it's something that I felt, they didn't have much time to compare notes, but I felt we got something similar talking to Ilie in the locker room. That was, there was a great deal of continuity between where their heads were at, these calm, cool, collected, considering the incredibly adverse circumstances, talented Spaniard football minds.
Right. And I want you to get into Ilie in a second here, but I did want to say one kind of locker room thing, because I got in at the very end.
Yeah.
We were in about 25 minutes. And the way that it works, for those of you who don't know, is when the press conference starts, they start the clock. So you either choose to be in the press conference with Nico, or you go into the locker room and you catch whichever players are willing to talk. Like, they have to engage, but by MLS rules, but their engagement can be, no, I don't want to talk, and then that's it. Or they can disappear. There's not just one door to get out of that place. And some players
some
will
of them
disappear.
Some of them will disappear. Some of them are not as good at saying no if they get caught, where they have newborn children and they want, or they had a very bad night and they'd like to get out. But some of them are such nice guys, in this case to their detriment. They will let
Right.
themselves get caught, and then they will begrudgingly answer a couple of questions, and then they'll excuse themselves.
Yeah. And Brad is great about it. And
Right.
the thing about Brad is that he could have just had a blanket statement where he's, yeah, it was a bad mistake. I feel really bad. He did all those sorts of things, but he brought that in response to a question that I was asking about just the game plan. And this is something I asked Nico too, is that Minnesota's a low possession team. Were they planning to have a lot of the ball? Were they prepared for that? And Brad talked about that. Brad talked about knowing what they were expecting from Minnesota on both sides of the ball. And he just said, because of the mistake I made, we were down a goal, we were chasing, that changed what we were doing. Nico did talk about, again, for someone who doesn't believe in formations, he brought up formations in the sum, talked about the shift from a 5-3-2, which is something that Minnesota typically plays, to a 5-4-1. And to me, that doesn't make that much difference. That just means that you're shifting somebody slightly back and you're adding to the midfield a little bit more. But in that 5-3-2, you still have Bongi Longwane, who is second highest player in positional average in terms of like where they are on the pitch. He is basically a forward or a winger in terms of where he's playing. So it's 5-3-2 or 5-4-1. You can argue that, but functionally, you have Bongi acting as this additional attacker. But this is stuff that they all knew, but the idea was, and again, I think this kind of gets to Eric's initial question, is this idea of when they go down a goal, what are they going to do? And they don't really have the offensive confidence right now. So if they go down 1-0, then it's problematic. If they can hang on, get a goal, and then hang on defensively to a 1-0 win, that's what they've done in the early part of the season. But now that's not happening because they're getting scored on first. But Brad broke it down. He did work in feeling bad about the mistake, but he did that in the context of tactics, and he did that in the context of what happened with the game plan and what went awry in those particular 90 minutes, which is something that I really appreciated.
Yeah. And I think, again, the full context of everything that was said in the press conference, a lot of people in the fan base have gotten very used to seeking the soundbite and seeking the, just give me a reason, Josh, just give me a reason. And that's a very reflexive thing for a lot of people. So I get it. And it's something that, as someone who has a propensity for being long-winded as well, along with using words like propensity, I can sympathize a bit that Nico is not as easy to interpret that way. And just on the media side of things, you could look at it as a failing, that he should be more soundbite tuned. But all day and all night, I would rather have a manager, albeit who is not getting the results, that makes both of our jobs easier and more interesting to talk about, because instead of having to be very analytical about all the things that went wrong, we can actually flip the other direction for once.
Even if the yarn spinning in the final question is keeping you from getting to the locker room and asking players your questions.
Yeah.
That I experienced last night.
And that's the thing that I don't know that's as much conscious on his part than that's just the nature of the availability. The main thing was that he is seeing resilience where lesser players would have either stayed where they were mentally in the Houston game, which was objectively worse than where they were this game.
Sure.
Bad result, sure.
I'll grant that.
Yeah. Bad result, sure. But I think that he wasn't necessarily cheerleading that. And there may, you know what? I'm going to delete the word may. There is a fundamentally different interpretation of the word pride when it comes to Americans and Europeans.
Okay.
And between the English-speaking world and the Spanish-speaking world, where there is more of a pride regarding resilience than rockets, red glare, and blowing apart battlements kind of thing. For Americans, there's a great deal more association with pride having to do with victory in battle in particular, is I guess what I'm keying in on.
Okay.
Where I think that's where that use of that term created an immediate dissonance in terms of what it was that he was trying to get across, which unfortunately took the rest of the press conference for him to actually get across in the way that he did. And I think the Spanish speaking journalist took it a bit differently in terms of his meaning of where he was coming from. And I'm saying native Spanish speakers, not those who learn Spanish as a non-native speaker.
Right. So he was actually developing something important, to be clear. It was not just him. It was not just the linguistic equivalent of CJ Fodry running to the corner at the end of a match to kill it off. If I keep them here long enough, my players won't have to answer questions from these guys who've been.
I tell you what tanks a season worse than a heliocentric player around whom everything revolves getting an ACL injury. It's a coach tanking that season by not holding his guys together at all costs, the way that it felt Nico Estevez was trying to in the locker room conversation none of us were party to prior to that press conference, and in the way that he was talking about them in that press conference. And I think that's the important thing that is probably going to get missed by just looking at the sound bites, just looking at the score line, and just looking back at what it felt like to experience that game.
Okay. So let us know what it was like to be in the calming presence of Ilie Sanchez.
The Lord Ilie Jesucristo, he balms all wounds. Again, there are so many things that everybody's gotten reflexively used to. And one of the things that we've been reflexively used to in the press has been not really having terribly forthcoming captains for this team. Seba Driussi, Alex Ring, even when Alex was more press available earlier on, which I only know by reputation, he's still cool, icy Northern European.
And towards the end, too.
And
you got to see it towards the end when he resumed the captaincy.
Yeah, he had it toward the end where he was cautiously standoffish. But Driussi was just never available. Never available. Yes, he was made available. But even when he was, quote unquote, available, he wasn't available, if you know what I mean.
Right.
This is a complete paradigm shift with Ilie Sanchez, who will at least briefly talk to us, even if he will decline speaking to us because he didn't play, as he had in a couple of matches. But we know that the captain of the team is going to talk to us, and it's not, can we get Brad or Ethan to talk to them? Because nobody else wants to talk. That was what things were for a while. And the clarity and the unity of philosophy that I saw between both the way that Nico and Ilie talked about the team last night and the way that they talked about them from the beginning of the season, from the very start, to me says that the cohesion issues that are on the field are not something that is necessarily fixed by getting rid of the coach, by trading one player. It is not that simple of a fix. And one of the things that Nico said that was echoed by things that Ilie was saying is that the issues are that it's obvious as the day is long, the coherence is not there. They are not there yet. They are not ready. But it is not for lack of trying. It's not for lack of interest in being there, in working things out. And the more refreshing thing that we got from Ilie that was not in Nico's comments that you could only get from a player was that he was like, this is on us. This is on us not being there. There were fans who said that he was waving them off, clapping for him as he was coming over to the supporters section. He is very firm about this not meeting the standard that they have of themselves. And it's not just, oh, there's this thing that they could call out or that they could make an excuse for. But I found it very refreshing that when I asked a question rattling out this difficult month of May ahead, and his eyes change a little as I just say how difficult May is going to be. And he said, no, we've known that May was going to be like this for months. That's not an excuse. We need to stop saying that. That is not, no, that's not how we talk about this.
Didn't he also, I think, in that answer, talk about relishing May, like actually being happy for all the opportunities to play all those games?
That was additionally refreshing. It was, you expect holding to sound bites, holding to some sort of positioning or something based on what we've come to expect, is that some of these guys fall back to the, well, we've got to come back better, we've got to move forward together, that kind of thing. That's what we've been used to getting. And not only getting the captain being willing to talk to us for as long as we have questions. There was no rush to go get changed. It was, he was going to talk to us. He was going to, for him, wearing the armband is, I'm going to take all of the tomatoes they have in the bag. I'm not going anywhere. That was the additional refreshing thing, is looking at a very punishing month, not as something that could turn into that gravity well, but that is the opportunity that they need to show what they are actually capable of, what all of them, not just the guys making millions of dollars a year, have as their job to do. That is something that they all, as a unit, as a project, see as an opportunity rather than something to dread, especially on a night like that. I have to have a great deal of respect for that.
Right. And at the very end, he talked about the role that the press has in helping bring light to things too. Like, he saw the press as part of the process, someone to engage the fans, to chronicle the team. He didn't say it quite in those words, but yeah, the implication was that he was, rather than just saying, oh, we had a bad night, the media is going to kill us, F the media, he was very inclusive and he was very understanding of how we were trying to convey, and that we're not necessarily part of the team, but we're part of the process. I think he understood our role really well and talked about it to y'all who were in there with him at the time in a way that is really reassuring.
Refreshing was the word of the night for me when it came to talking to Ilya, because to me, the way that it came off, and I think one of my colleagues may have misinterpreted it as, hey, remember, these guys are human beings too. Like he was trying to wave us off of being critical. That wasn't the way that I read it at all. To me, it was that we in the press have to hold them to account for performances like tonight. And there are a couple of things that I do want to mention about play that was concerning, that were among the problems that I think they've got to solve, however they friggin' solve it. But that comment, to me, that is the level of understanding that I have wanted there to be in that relationship, not with our friends, the middlemen in the comms department who keep the friendly barrier up, but that kind of reset, recalibration of the relationship and understanding of, this is what they gave us to write about, and we've got to write about it responsibly and ethically. And they have no doubt that we will be above board, those of us who are happy to stay above board, but that he does not want us to hold back. That's great. That's exactly what I would want.
Yeah. And the word that I use is concern and concerning, because it comes out of this certain level of care. We are not fans in the same way that people in the South End are fans, right? So there's a certain level of kind of journalistic remove that we have. You are covering a team. It's hard to be quote unquote objective. There's subjectivity everywhere, but it's more from the perspective, for me at least, is that, yeah, these are people that we come to know week in, week out. We like and respect these players, and we want to see them do well. When they do well, it's more fun to write about. People are happy. Winning brings people together. That's the hope of sports. When you lose, you commiserate, you feel bad, but you don't root for a team unless you are born into a team. You don't root for a team year in and year out to feel the pain of losing. That's not, you expect victories, you expect good moments, you expect to cheer and feel good. And in some cases, the RSL playoff victory, leave your body momentarily, right? So, and we come at it from this perspective of, we are concerned when they are doing poorly because we want to see them do well. And if they're doing poorly, we're certainly going to call them on that, but it's not just going to be point the finger, call them names, put something up on a plane and fly it over Q2 Stadium. It's going to be, let's try to really understand this and figure out what's going on. And if it is getting better, and then also hold the coaches and the players to account and say, okay, they are first and foremost in their jobs concerned about making this better. That is the focus this week, is make what is going wrong right now better. Ozuni needs to score. Vasquez needs to score. Defense needs to not let in multiple goals a game. All those things are things that they're going to be consumed by, much more than we are. But we're still going to hold them to account for it. And what I would hope to see in covering this team and wanting them to do well is to see them make that kind of progress. And if they make that kind of progress, great. I have something happy to write about. And if they are not, and if the slide continues, then I have to call it like I see it.
Yeah. And I think to your point about gassing up the plane, I think it's totally reasonable of the fans to be alarmed and be looking at, okay, this is 5 alarm fire time. And it is on the new coaching regime, which does hold over some of the previous coaching regime, Davey Arnaud for one. It is on them, it is on the club, it is on the players to signal to the fans by Wednesday what things are looking like. We think we have a tentative midweek press availability on Tuesday, the day before the match against Locomotive. And hey, if I were trying to hide things, then I would scurry that off. But the thing that, again, I have to say to the credit of Nico's crew is that I don't see them wanting that. I see them wanting the opposite of that, of if we cannot take all guns being pointed at us, then we cannot win against a USL championship team, and we might as well just give up and go home. The couple of other little things that I have rattling around in my head on this is that there is that set of reflexive reactions that we've got built up from a lot of years of, not that many, but it feels like a lot more years of standoffishness, of the press as the enemy, of the press as wholly outside the gates and begrudgingly let inside the gates. And I appreciate this different bearing, not just in terms of the way the club operations team and so on, the business type people, the people, wearing laminate badges, and the way that the actual sporting operation individuals comport themselves with us, where there is only so much that they can stage. There's only so much that they can hide. We don't see what we don't see. But I appreciate that there has been that shift. And my hope is that everybody on all points of the club side of things does what they need to in advance of Wednesday to prove that the patience has merit, and that the fans can ride with them through this month, and that they're going to see these as opportunities. But to your point, look, if it is nothing but downslide, that's all the shots that we have to call. Can I note a thing from last night that gave me a great deal of concern, that called back to something we'd previously seen?
I think I know what you're going to say. We haven't seen a snake and a wolf fight, but
I'm concerned about something that happened around the 15th minute that called back to a brief interaction that I saw in the locker room a few weeks ago, early in Mirto's time playing. There was a brief conversation between him and Owen Wolf. The only piece of it that I caught was an indication that there was some communication breakdown. I don't want to quote it because that wasn't technically part of the availability, but noting that there was some communicative friction there was concerning, because we've seen that on the field.
Right. And just want to preface this by saying a couple of minutes before this happened, we saw Ozuni and Wolf with a really great combination down the left side, which didn't turn into anything like many things last night, but it gave some good, hopeful indications. I mean, like that and the through balls to Bukari in the first 15 minutes made me think in that early part of the game, okay, they're trying some things. They're understanding that they're lacking progressive passes. They're lacking through balls. They're trying to do some things to advance the ball. And they did win field tilt last night. They were dominant in terms of final third passes. Minnesota made the most of their spare chances. Austin did not make anything of their chances. But yeah, so that just sets the scene for what you're going to talk about here. Just this kind of notion that, okay, we did see this kind of cohesion between Ozuni and Wolf, and that was really encouraging. And then
it just fell apart. And then you, clear as day, saw this disagreement between the players on the pitch, shouting across at each other.
And this is about 15th minute, right?
About the 15th minute. And haven't looked back at the broadcast, but it was very clearly visible without looking through my binoculars in the press box. And my understanding is that it was visible on the broadcast. But that's one of those mentality things that we talked about in the most recent episode too, where they are still shaving the rough edges off of some of this stuff. Some of these guys are still getting to know each other. And I don't think that this is a kind of locker room conflict thing that spells disaster. If it doesn't improve, it certainly does. But I think that we've seen some game over game progress certainly between the Houston game and this game. I think that is a sign for Nico Estevez's brand of optimism, in that these guys don't have to like each other, but they do have to like each other enough to play well with each other. Because if they don't play well together, then all of their trade value goes through the floor. And to something that you had just mentioned, you mentioned dominating field tilt and various other things. And I think it's something that I just want to note as just a funny little thing, is that coaches by nature have to be creatures of contradiction. And I adore that the Nico Estevez of a few weeks ago of 3 points sure looks better than blah, blah, blah stat. And now it's, well, look at all these stats that are looking encouraging and productive, yet the 3 points are not on the board. He's having to look for where the positive progress is, and the corner to be turned is getting to both the stats looking good and the actual 3 points hitting the board. But this lack of cohesion between Owen and Mirto is something that I am very nervously keeping an eye on. Yeah. And it is definitely in a concerning zone. But if we had not seen the improvement that we did between the Houston match and this one, I would be a lot more concerned. My hope is that on the other side of a loss like this, that mentality-wise, just interpersonally, that this is something that the players are managing to deal with. Because Mirto makes X million number of dollars a year. Sure, that's a multiple of what so many of us make in a year. But also, he is here playing club soccer for the fans, as he said in his Hulk Out press conference, and not with his wife and newborn baby back in Spain. And that is a pretty significant sacrifice. There are things more important than football that he is consciously setting aside for the time being in the interest of focusing on the job, which may be having deleterious effects on the actual on the field play. It could be that it is causing more of a distraction than a help. But this is where things are. This is the decision that was made. And as Nico has said in the past, those decisions were up to Mirto and his wife to decide what they wanted to do when the baby came. And that is something that they locked in and decided at some point. And this is where we are. So to me, the question is, that relationship going to gel and improve the way that you see some really solid connectivity between John Gallagher and Osman Bukhari, the way that we'll see Mikel Dessler come back into the lineup, that he and Osman were working pretty well together. There are those things of cohesion that really do just take time and get disrupted all of a sudden like this.
Yeah, because the thing too is that, Uzuni and Wolf are not just two random circles in a line on a passing network map. Right now, Owen Wolf is the closest thing that this team has to a 10. Uzuni is obviously one of the key attackers. If this team is going to be successful, he needs to be scoring. Vasquez needs to be scoring. Bukhari needs to be at least contributing assists, if not goals outright. Hopefully some combination of all three of those players are doing both of those things for each other. But that relationship's really important. It's not just about maybe there's a lack of cohesion there and we can fix that in other ways, especially with Pereira out right now. Wolf is going to play. Unless Azuni's going to be benched to send some sort of message to him, he's going to play. They're going to be on the field together. They're going to need to work together. These games are not going to get especially easy in May. There might be some quote unquote softer teams that are coming in, but still certainly capable teams. Atlanta's having a down season, but Atlanta's also really talented and they've got a lot of really good players. And if Austin has an off night and they're not prepared, Atlanta could put up a lot of goals on them.
I feel, going back to the how do you handle this? How do you coach this? The armchair coaching of, they really need to rub Mirto's nose in the dirt, or they really need to rub this player's nose in the dirt and tell him to get back out on the field. He's gone now. I can say this. That's how Josh coached. He would shame them. Briefly touching on the Johan Romagna thing, I think there were other elements to things, like people taking as read Romagna giving an interview about how he had a bacterial infection and Wolf was bullying him for saying that he was not match fit. I think I can believe definitely a certain amount of that based on just the way that he would talk about other players. He would openly throw players onto the bus. Diego Fagundes, for one. Oh, look at that size of that contract, kind of thing. That was uncalled for. That was ridiculous. You want to lose the locker room? Okay, store a barrel of gasoline in there and throw in a match. There's a piece of it that I get, but then there's also did Romagna really want to be here specifically, or did he want to be here for this step on his career on his way to something else? I feel that the way that they have reworked the roster, the way that they have reworked the personality of the locker room of this team, is that these are guys who want to be here and want to play here for this phase of their careers. Ilya Sanchez, Robert Taylor, whether and what the next step of their careers are. Diego Rubio is like, do not burn a sub on me, shove tissue paper up my nose. I will run around the field with tissue paper up my nose, which plenty of photos went around of. These guys are very deeply committed. And even though the results result in them not talking to us as much and people don't hear from them as much, I feel that the intimations that they are just giving up repeatedly is from maybe watching on TV or not paying as close of attention as we pay. Certainly in the Houston game, yeah, there was a certain amount of, all right, unclench and let go. And that was really the most prominent moment of, I could see it being a lack of effort. But I feel that there is this, everybody talks to them when they're deflated after they have lost, and that's where their heads are at. There is a fair amount of engagement that is going on that gets missed because there's focus on the final result and not all of the work that has gone into a lot of these games where more progress is happening than a lot of us end up seeing.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, it is still about results. And I think, which is where you go back full circle to the opening of that press conference. That's where that comes from. If you are seeing from a team that they can't come back from deficits, which is something that they're going to face over the course of the season, they're not going to be in the playoffs, maybe, unless if they have a formula where they play stout defense, they get a goal, they hang on. But even when they were doing that in the early part of the season, we worried about the sustainability about that over the full season. Nico knows it's about results, obviously. He very acutely knows that from having lost a job just last year because he wasn't getting the results that the front office thought that he should be getting, even though the team wasn't in the sort of moribund shape that maybe other teams have been in. And that team eventually they did not make the playoffs, but one of the problems was Peter Musa wasn't scoring. And we talked about that with him in the preseason. And there was a lot going on with Musa and a new baby and adjusting to life in a new country. And it, unfortunately for Nico, it came together after Nico left. And you could maybe attribute part of that to their interim coach, but also you can attribute part of that to just he was able to get his head right from a difficult stretch, which just happened to coincide with losses and draws and not wins that sealed Nico's fate.
Yeah, it is a grueling schedule. It is a grueling slog every MLS season for each of these clubs. And trying to apply even Liga MX expectations, European club expectations, that kind of thing to MLS, the unfortunate thing about it is that this league has a different character to it that can be about these kinds of long progressions where I think you're right, very much right to bring up the Peter Musa example, where I don't know that you can credit the turnaround of that team because they fired Nico. It was, things take a long time to simmer and cook when you are putting together really disparate pieces. It's not like incorporating a European player into another European club team, not just for their acclimation, but for the play styles, for the communication styles between the players. There is more of a spread of communication styles between where different players come from in MLS because it isn't exclusively Europe. So again, it may be the comfortable thing to say that somehow like Nico's paying the mortgage on my house or something, but I get the philosophy of things. I get the philosophy of what they're doing with the second team now in building a core of players that, like an Irvin Torres, might see minutes this month because they just need to rotate in with guys that they are in the long haul for. And as uncomfortable as it may be to watch right now, I'm very much taking the line of the optimist and not as the guy who thinks they're going to win 9 games straight. Right. But as the guy who joked that, well, if they win these next 9 games straight, then Josh Wolf's going to keep his job. As the comedian who likes to think that looking at opportunity and looking at good mental health practices in terms of the way that you're coaching is something that leads to more full long-term success than grabbing some short-term something. And to me, even winning MLS Cup is a short-term thing, as you see with LA Galaxy this season.
Some of that has to do with where their roster was last year versus where
Uh-huh.
the roster is this year. I know I made predictions here a couple of days ago,
Uh-huh.
but I'm going to go into these next games trying to leave expectations at the door because it is MLS and it's, again, on paper, you could assume Austin's going to lose 3-0 or 4-0 to Cincinnati. Cincinnati's the best team in the East right now. They're playing at home. Austin's in a dip, but this could be one of those weird MLS games where somehow Austin pulls out a win because MLS, freaky things happen occasionally, right? Someone gets a red card maybe, or Matt Miazga is still on that team.
Matt Miazga is currently captain of FC
Right.
Cincinnati.
Oh my God. Yeah. So again, I think just going into these games, just I'm not necessarily trusting the process. As Philadelphia 76ers fans know, it's not a particularly fortuitous long-term phrase, but just going in trying to be open-minded and not being predisposed to, oh, we're going to get our hats handed to us week after week, because I don't necessarily think that's the case. We have seen cohesiveness at times with this team. We know that there's talent on this team. I think just try to be open-minded and see the work going into it game by game, and then look at the end result, look at, are there encouraging signs, are there discouraging signs, and just try to digest it and I guess not make any kind of assumptions or declarations of we are winning MLS Cup or we are getting the wooden spoon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think breathe a little bit and thinking about it as being proud that those same players were who they were on Saturday night versus who they were in Houston, which was inexcusably bad.
Yeah.
Inexcusably bad.
Against Vancouver, they were
Even against
getting
Vancouver.
their butts whooped and they were still fighting. Heinz Eich risked his face to try to stop a goal. Pereira got one of the goals of his life. It was ultimately meaningless, but they ruined a clean sheet. It's small consolation, but I really saw them fighting to the end. It was just futility in the face of what they were up against that night in that team that is doing very well right now.
Yeah, I would flatly, just to make sure that it's real clear where I stand on this, I would say to fans, I would say to fellow colleagues in the press, I'm not saying that anybody should not be holding them to account. The coaching staff, the sporting operation, the players. I think it's a beautiful thing that they want to be held to account for this. And I appreciate that massive change. And so we'll see what happens on Wednesday, and we'll see how they show up to the microphone on Tuesday. And I appreciate a lack of hostility when it comes to us being expected to do our jobs the right way, and we will.
Yeah, absolutely. So in conclusion, we hope this made you feel better. We know it was rough. It was rough for us. It was rough for the players. It was rough for the coaches. It was rough for everybody wrapped in verde and black. Just wherever your feelings are on this team and Nico and all that, it was a rough one. It was not an easy game to digest, but we, like many Instagram posts have said, we move forward together. I mean, there's some truth to it. It risks being cliche if it's used multiple times, but there is something that is solid and something that is bringing this sort of notion of shaking it off and remembering the bonds that we have as fans, the bonds that players have as players. I do think that it's much more encouraging to see that than to see the kind of energy that we saw, especially last year.
Yeah. And I cannot wait for seeing that turn where that special air comes back in the stadium, in other stadiums, where the air they breathe in as they go in for what will be a successful strike smells and tastes a little bit sweeter and feels a little bit cooler and more magical around them. I want us to be talking about that kind of poetry rather than playing the dirges. And it remains to be seen what the rest of the month brings.
Okay. So we're gonna go and return to our animal skins right now. We hope you do the same.
Return to your animal skin.